Oh, it is wonderful to be a Christian. Oh, it is wonderful to be God's child. Oh, it is wonderful to have your sins forgiven. Oh, it is wonderful to be redeemed, justified, forever reconciled.
Hello out there in Radio Land. This is Michael. This is the Street Preacher's Corner podcast, the podcast where our motto is we just keep on keeping on. Actually, our motto is also 80% of life is just showing up. And so we've showed up here to talk to you about Mark Lesson 73 is what we're calling it. Now, if I'd had I say we, and sometimes I say we because I'm schizophrenic or whatever. But this time I say we because I have here with me my number two son, and not number two in like favoritism, but number two is in order of birth. Cameron. Say something, Cameron.
Hello.
Do better than that. Again.
Hello out there in Radio Land.
So I'd ask for his help because I value his opinion. He is actually one of the smartest people I know. And the thing that drives me nuts about Cameron is he sometimes arrives at opinions that are different than mine using logic and facts. And I don't much care for that. I wish he would just blindly accept my opinion like some other people should. Scoot a little closer to this microphone. So anyway, we are Mark Lesson 73. And we're going to talk, if I had been a little more clever about this, a little more had a plan, this would have come out in the middle of April, about April 15th, which for you adults, you know that it's tax season and tax time, and the deadline is April 15th, because we're going to talk about taxes, and we're going to talk about it in light of Mark. But now, the odd thing about this lesson today is we're teaching through the book of Mark, but the thing I'm going to be talking about is not actually in Mark. But it happens, the incident we're going to be talking about it happens between two verses in Mark. It happens in one of the other Gospels, but it happens between two verses in Mark. And so we're going to start in Mark chapter 9, verse 30. This is on the heels of Jesus casting the devil out of that guy's son, that the disciples could not do it. And if you've been following along, that's where we're at. Verse 30 says, "And they departed thence and passed through Galilee, and he would not that any man should know it." Why? Verse 31. "For he taught his disciples and said to them, The Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men, and they shall kill him, and after that he is killed, he shall rise the third day." So they passed through Galilee kind of clandestinely. They went through into Galilee and back out. And it says that they didn't want anybody to know it. And the reason they didn't want anybody to know it is because Jesus Christ already knows that there are people out to kill him, and it's just not time yet for them to kill him. So what he does, he just kind of slips into town and slips back out. But he tells his disciples, not for the first time. This is like 3 or 4 times now he's told them that he's going to be delivered in the hands of men, and they shall kill him, and after that he is killed, he shall rise the third day. And it says in verse 32, "But they understood not that saying, and were afraid to ask him." Now, it's interesting because it's pretty plain to me. I don't know how much, what is there not to understand, right? I think part of the problem these guys ran into is that they were, I feel for them, I really do, because I understand how they got there. They were expecting a Messiah that was going to come in and overthrow the Roman government and put himself on the throne and issue in a reign of righteousness, an era of righteousness where Israel was going to be the head, not the tail, and all their enemies that had oppressed them all these years were finally going to get their comeuppance. And here it is, instead of talking about that, Jesus Christ is talking about he's going to die. And they can't understand at this point in the program here how you can have a cross and a crown. But he explains it to them right there. He says, I'm not going to stay dead. But it says here they didn't understand him. I think it goes a little bit further. I don't think they believed him. And the reason I don't think they believed him, well, let's look at Matthew 17. Yeah, Matthew 17. Where am I at here? Verse 22. "While they abode in Galilee, Jesus said unto them, The Son of Man shall be betrayed." This is the same conversation. "Shall be betrayed into the hands of men, and they shall kill him, and the third day he shall be raised again." And they were exceeding sorry. So I think one of the reasons they had a problem, and this is not what we're talking about, but we got to cover it because it's there in the verse. One of the things that they had that didn't make sense to them is, okay, so they had seen people raised from the dead, right? They'd seen Lazarus, they'd seen Jairus' daughter. There's a handful of people at this point in the narrative, at this point in the history, that they had seen people raised from the dead. But Jesus had been the one doing it. So if Jesus dies, who's going to raise Jesus from the dead? Doesn't that seem reasonable to you?
Yeah.
The question in the back of their mind. Well, the scripture tells you Jesus raised himself from the dead. So, but they every time you notice in the disciples, every time Jesus starts talking about the cross and his death, his upcoming death, they get skittish. And this is one of those times. So they're sitting, and we're going to go ahead and stay in Matthew 17, because between verse 32 and 33, I guess it is, this thing happens. And when they would come to Capernaum, so they left Galilee, they go through Galilee kind of, clandestinely. And
For those listening at home, he meant 22 and 23, not 32 and 33.
Yeah, I mean, if I had a nickel for every time I got the verse wrong, this podcast would pay for itself. Is it? Let's see. Let's take the time and look.
22 and 23.
No, I'm talking about it happens between. If you go back to Mark 9, and you look between verse 32 and 33. So in 32 or 31 they're in Galilee, right? And in verse 32 they're in Galilee. In verse 33 they're in Capernaum. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So something happens between verse 32 and 33, and that's in Matthew 17, verse 24. And when they were come to Capernaum, they that received tribute money came to Peter and said, "Doth not your master pay tribute?" Excuse me. So I want to. My grandfather, who you did not meet because he died when I was a wee thing, he was a moonshiner among other things, and he made his own booze and everything. And the issue with all that when that was happening was not that the government really cared that you were making your own booze. The government cared they weren't getting the tax money from it. And so they would send revenue agents, which my grandfather called revenuers, to shake you down for the money that they thought you owed them for all the booze you were making and selling. So whenever I read about these guys that take the tribute money, my brain automatically thinks, of a revenuer. So in Matthew 17, verse 24, the revenuers swing by, and they ask a question. They said, "Doth not your master pay tribute?" Now they asked this to Peter, which I don't know why. Why not ask Jesus unless they were, cowards or something? But a tribute is a money or labor exacted from you by force. Webster says it's an annual or stated sum of money or other valuable thing paid by one prince to another or nation to another, either as an acknowledgement of submission or as the price of peace or protection. So that's what a tribute is. It's shakedown money. It's protection money. And it's interesting because the person that pays the tribute, there's a name for that too. It's called a tributary. Yep. And a tributary is the little river that feeds the big river. So that's fun. So it's a shakedown. And these shakedowns in the ancient world were usually done at the city gates. But Capernaum is not a walled city, I checked. But there has to be a place. And it's hard to extrapolate the geography of a place 2,000 years ago. But there had to have been a place where you go as you're coming into town to pay your tribute. I mean, that's it's got to be a headquarters or an office or something. There always is.
It might not be as you're coming into town either, because he says yes, and then he goes. It says in the next verse, he saith yes, and when he was come into the house, Jesus prevented him, saying,
right.
So that implies Jesus is already in the house, so he's already in the city before tribute is being asked for.
And one of the things I don't understand about this story is Capernaum's got like 2,000 people in it. It's smaller than the town we go to church in.
Yeah.
And here you have a dozen guys popping in and out of town on a regular basis. Why does this revenuer not already know the answer to this question? Unless it's an insincere question, which is one of my theories. So these revenuers are in all likelihood they are publicans, like Matthew had been before he left that behind. And if they are publicans, then they are basically traitors to their own people. They're collecting taxes from their fellow Jews to turn over to the Roman government.
Yep.
And so let's assume it's a publican, and let's assume this scene happens sort of right outside Capernaum or somewhere as they're going to wherever this house is that they wind up at. Then he says, "Does your master pay tribute?" And I'll tell you what I think is going on. You and I talked about this a little bit before. If you look at the people that are traveling with Jesus, you have Matthew, who left behind a lucrative job as a tax collector to go follow Jesus. And then you have a zealot there with him, who was a people that were violently opposed, almost like domestic terrorism level stuff, to the Roman occupation and the Roman payment of taxes. So in a group of 12 guys, you've got at least two. You've got one guy that left the tax world, and you've got a guy that is known for his opposition to the taxes. And so if that's all you knew of Jesus' disciples, was that those two guys were in it, you could assume that Jesus is leading some sort of anti-tax Roman insurrection thing, and that's why those two guys are with him. And I think that's part of that question there.
That makes sense.
So I think the real question, when he says, "Does your master pay tribute?" the real question is your master one of those anti-Roman insurrectionists? But he asks, he says, "Does your master pay tribute?" And Peter says, "Yes," which means that Jesus had paid tribute in the past. Okay, so you got to stick a pin in that.
This is cohesive with when the Pharisees, in one of the other books, this is actually the chapter I was reading last night to one of my friends. In one of the other books, the Pharisees ask him, "Is it lawful to pay tribute to Caesar?"
Yeah, we weren't going to cover that, but that's the same kind of vein. Yeah. So the question that I had when I'm sorting through all this, the question I had was, and you and I had mentioned this before, a lot of stuff that just I'm going through, it comes out of my head and out of my mouth. So the Jews had been given that land by God, and as long as they behaved themselves and did what God told them to do, they lived a land. They had a king. They were supposed to have a king, a descendant of David, sitting on the throne, ruling and reigning over them. And because of sin, they had allowed them. God had allowed them to become conquered over and over and over again and occupied. The Babylonians came in and knocked everything down, took everybody away. The Chaldeans came in, the Romans, the Egyptians, all this stuff, all this time that Israel spent occupied. They spent occupied because of sin. Yeah. And so because liberty is the fruit of righteousness, when a people become unrighteous, when they become wicked people,
they lose
liberty. And so you see that in our own country. That we I hate to say it, man, we deserved a Joe Biden for 4 years because we're still doing all the terrible stuff that led to that. And so what you had when Joe Biden was in office, and I'm not going to go sit on Trump's lap and kiss him on the mouth or nothing, but what you had was an elevation under for 4 years of what was already going on. You had a celebration of the wickedness that got us there to begin with, and that's America's not Israel. I'm not trying to say they are. I'm trying to say that right now, at this point in history, in Matthew 17, the Romans have come in. They've been occupying Israel for some time now. And the question you have to ask yourself is does the occupying Roman government have any legitimate authority over Jesus? And it sounds like a trick question, and it's only partially a trick question. Let's look at Romans 13. So Jesus is standing there, and they ask his disciple, right? They ask, "Does your master pay tribute?" He says, "Yes." Okay, so we know he had in the past. The question is, did he have to? Okay, so Romans 13. And Romans 13, man, one of these days I'm going to sit down and I'm going to give this passage the attention that it deserves, because it is the basis for a lot of good things that happen and the basis for a lot of bad things that happen. And let me lay my biases on the table. About 5 years ago, the Church of Jesus Christ in America had an opportunity to figure out some things about Romans 13, and I think for the most part they dropped the ball. The COVID thing happened, and churches were told to shut down, and there were churches that went to Romans 13 and said we got to shut down, and then there were churches that went to Romans 13 and said we got to stay open. And I think it was a mistake for churches to shut down. If you're out there and you're listening to this, and you had to make that call, and you had to make that call in real time on very little information, and some of it, the information you were given wasn't even true, I feel for you. I mean, I'm for you. I'm not mad at you. But I think looking back, we can see, okay, that was a mistake. Romans 13. If you can't go to church, but you can still go get an abortion, something wrong. When you can't go to church, but you can still hit the liquor store. It's weird. You can't catch COVID at a Black Lives Matter rally. You can't catch COVID at Walmart, but you can catch it. It's so bizarre. Sorry. Romans 13, verse 1. Let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he, talking about the government, the ruler, is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore you must needs be subject not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. That's important. For this cause pay ye tribute also. For they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues tribute to whom is tribute, custom to whom is custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. So obviously there's a ton in that, but just skim the surface. So legitimate government is a God-ordained institution, but legitimate government has limitations. It has certain functions it's supposed to do, and those functions are laid out right there in Romans 13. According to Romans 13, verse 3 and 4, the reason God ordained government is to promote righteousness and to punish evil. And so the way they do this, they support good and they stand up against evil. The way they do this is they leave good guys alone and they put bad guys in jail. And it's really not any more complicated than that. So if you have a government that is encouraging lawlessness, like you saw in 2021, 22, where it's encouraging lawlessness, that government is not performing a legitimate function. When you have a government where we know there are criminals in the country and we're trying to get rid of them, or trying to get whatever, and there are elements of your government standing in the way of that, they're outside the bounds of Romans 13. I mean, we okay so far, Cameron?
Yeah.
Okay, so a righteous man has nothing to fear from a proper government acting within its God-given boundaries. And there is an element in, because I'm not a Republican, I'm a libertarian, and there's an element within libertarian thought that is wrong, in that there are some people that are opposed to any sort of government. They say the only government a man needs is himself. Well, that's clearly not true if you've ever read a history book.
Yeah. Anarchy does not produce anything but, anarchy.
Yeah.
That's...
There is a proper role for government, and the book of Jude tells us that people that despise government do so because they're self-willed. It's not they're really interested in liberty. They're really interested in nobody telling them what to do. And I made the same kind of dirt as everybody else. I hate to be told what to do, but here we are. And God has ordained some people in life to tell me what to do. And for the most part, because I'm not a lawbreaker, I don't need anyone to tell me what to do, because I'm already doing the things I'm supposed to be doing. But there are bad people in the world, and they need to be told what not to do. And when they don't do that, when they do the bad thing, the job of government is to scoop them up and get them away from decent folk. Another sermon for another time. But let me repeat the question. So did the occupying Roman government have any legitimate authority over Jesus? Well, like I said, it's only partially a trick question. So there's a side to Jesus Christ, an element of his makeup of his being that is above and beyond the authority of the Roman government. I mean, he's God manifested in the flesh. He's the one that put those authorities in place and gave them certain duties to do. And but it's interesting, when the Romans arrest Jesus, Jesus never throws a fit and says, you don't have any jurisdiction here. I'm God manifest in the flesh. The Bible says he learned obedience by the things which he suffered, and all those pieces of the elements of Jesus' nature, they are all part of this equation. Let's look at Matthew 17 again. Okay. So when I ask the question, does the Roman government have any authorization, any authority over Jesus Christ? Yes. Because he's submitted himself. And so, right? Okay. Matthew 17, verse 25. Verse 24 says, doth not your pastor pay tribute? And verse 25, he saith, yes. And when he was coming to the house, Jesus prevented him. That's a word that means he went in there before him to pre-event. You see that in 1 Thessalonians 5. Saying, what thinkest thou, Simon? Of whom do the kings of earth take custom or tribute? of their own children or of strangers. Now, I don't think it's I don't know why the revenuer sought out Peter. I don't think Peter was the head disciple, like he had a special hat on that they could. Oh, that's the head disciple. Let's go talk to him. But I do think it is not a coincidence that Jesus asked Peter this question. Because say what you will about Peter, you can go through every time that Jesus asked a disciple a question. You ask Peter a question, you're going to get the straight answer. You're not going to get a flowery speech. Peter was an older fellow. It looks like he owned a business. He had boats that were, other people working for him. And so this is a guy. He had a wife. I mean, he's lived some life. And so when you talk to Peter, you don't get flowery theory. You get
you get a simple working man's response.
Right. So Jesus addresses the situation by asking an interesting question. The question wasn't, what did that guy want? The question is one of jurisdiction. Right? He says, what thinkest thou, Simon, of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute of their own children or of strangers? So there's an old saying that says you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind's blowing. I think it's actually a lyric from a Bob Dylan song. So Peter knew which way the wind blows. Peter understood that whoever in charge, the king or the president or the premier, prime minister, emperor, whatever title you want to put on the person in charge, that guy's family is not getting harassed by the revenuers.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and it's good to be the king after all. And you might live in a hovel and you might live in a hut and you might eat dirt, but the guy in charge is not doing any of those things. And neither are his kids.
Yeah.
Rank has its privileges, right? So Peter said to them, of strangers. Jesus said to them, then are the children free. So Jesus understood that's how the world works. Peter understood that's how the world works. They're going to take this money from us, and they're going to use it to enrich themselves. They are living at our expense. And you could say that's fair. You could say it's not fair. It is how it is. But there are two things that Jesus did not do in this passage. He didn't disagree with Peter. And he didn't say that the tribute was fair or just. There's a mindset among Christians that, since God ordained government, that everything government ordains is also ordained of God. That's ridiculous. Why would you think that? Why would you think that if God puts a man in charge, that everything that man did after that was God's idea? That doesn't work that way in your life or mine, right? Good.
While he doesn't say the tribute is fair or just here, I'm going to again hearken back to give to Caesar that which is Caesar's. That is him saying the tribute is fair and just it's in a different spot in the Bible, but it is the same application.
I disagree that's what he's saying, and we can look at it. It's not in my notes, but we can look at it if you want to. I mean, I didn't bring you here just to hear myself talk. But I would say that tax collection does not fall under Romans 13 unless the money from that is directly being used to keep good guys safe and put bad guys in jail. So you have a situation like in our own country where we were sending money to insane things that nobody in their right mind would agree to. We were taking money from people, not from the king's kids, but from everybody else, and we were using it for things that those people would never in a million years agree to.
Yeah.
So you can say, well, there's a legitimate place for that stuff, sure, but it is the exception rather than the rule. It has nothing to do with upholding righteousness or opposing evil, and it is arguably an illegitimate practice. Although Romans 13 does tell you to give tribute to whom tribute is due.
Yeah.
Well, then, in what case would tribute be due?
It does not specify.
It would be due. It would be due if that tribute money is being used for the things that Romans 13 says they're supposed to be using it for. Okay. All right. So anyway, and I'm going to say I'm going to ask a question. It's a ridiculous question. Okay. So let's just assume for a minute I'm right because that's fun.
First time for everything.
Yeah, well, blind squirrels and acorns and all that stuff. So let's say that I'm right, and I never get tired of saying that or hearing that. But and this is an overreach. This is not maybe not in principle unfair, but in application unfair. Okay, so So then, should Jesus have lodged a protest? Should Jesus have stood his ground, and should Jesus have led an anti-tax movement and threw Roman tea into the Sea of Galilee? Of course not. I mean, right? You agree? Why not?
Because that wasn't what he was here to do.
Right. Exactly. So the clock is ticking, and there are bigger issues than petty bureaucrats and their army of quizzling publicans shaking down people for whatever spare change they have. Jesus has an appointment with the cross, and Jesus has direct orders and priorities from the Father, and those orders don't involve tax reform. Everything Jesus does, from the healings to everything that he does, culminates and leads to Calvary. And as the time is getting closer, because you only have, really, there's a timeline set in Daniel 9 from the time that the order goes forward to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem under the cutting off the Messiah. We know exactly how many years that is, and we are most of the way there. We're like a year maybe left on that clock, and so Jesus does not have time to get caught up in this little side thing. The focus has to be the cross, and we're still in Matthew 17, verse 27 says, "Notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, go out of the sea and cast a hook and take up the fish that first cometh up. And when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. That take and give unto them for me and thee." So, I'm going to put it this way. So, Jesus was mistreated his entire life by pretty much everybody. And he never lodged a protest. In fact, turn to 1 Peter 2. 1 Peter 2. Well, I'm finding it. You got any thoughts so far on where we're at?
Not particularly.
Okay. I need you to find that passage about giving to Caesar, because we're going to look at it. And I'll give you my thoughts on it. And you may say I'm nuts, but we'll do the first one. So 1 Peter 2, the Bible do say, verse 19, "For this is thankworthy if a man for conscience endure toward God endure grief, suffering wrongfully. For what glory is it if when you be buffeted for your faults, you shall take it patiently? But if when you do well and suffer for it, you take it patiently, this is acceptable with God. For even hereunto you were ye called, because Christ has also suffered from us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled not again. When he was suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself unto him that judgeth righteously." And it goes on to quote a passage at Isaiah 53. So, think about this. So, these people that Jesus interacted with, including this publican, they had no problem offending him, right? But he had a problem with offending them. He decided to not offend them and just to pay them to make them go away.
Yeah.
That's what's happening there. But what this is, this thing where, hey, you haven't paid your tribute money, you need to pony up. That is just one more injustice, one more stupid thing that Jesus Christ endured while he's walking around in enemy territory. So let me use that as kind of a launching pad for a little bit of a rant. The world is full of causes to which you could commit yourself, right? You could go save the whales. I don't even know if that's a thing anymore. You could protest. You could wrap your whole life in addressing autism. You could wrap your whole life in getting fluoride out of water. You could wrap your whole life in tax reform. You could wrap your whole life, and people do. Yeah. And I understand why they do, because a righteous man sees injustice in the world and he wants to fix it. And you could do some things, but I think it is very easy to get wrapped up in things and to get off mission, because God's given you a mission and the clock in your life is ticking. So there's a guy that we both know. I'm not going to say his name, but you can probably figure out who he is, Cameron. And there's a guy that he's always given me a hard time about street preaching because he thinks I'm a mean guy, and I'm not a mean guy. I mean, you've been with me a bunch of times, right? Yeah. I'm not a mean guy. I'm not a nice guy. I'm not like Jesus loves you and wants to sit on the lap and give you a kiss, but I'm not a mean guy. Yeah. So, but this guy always thought I was mean. He always thought I wasn't being loving enough. Well, he wasn't doing anything, but he had an issue with what I was doing, which is that's how that works. So one particular time, I was going to go preach at this festival in Kingsland, and that was going to be on a Saturday. And I ran into him like the day before, a couple days before. And he told me, if you really loved sinners, you'd be down at that festival in Kingsland. Well, I'd already planned on going, so it wasn't like, oh no, he's convicted me. I must now, obligate myself. I was already going. And I got down there the next day or whatever day that was, and I see this guy. And he's got this American flag, like Hawaiian shirt on, all those American flags on it. And he's out there passing out, not gospel tracts, he's passing out brochures about how Donald Trump's going to save America and how the Democrats are going to put us all in cages and kill us.
Of course, yeah.
So he had taken that zeal that he felt like I should have for the gospel, and he had applied it someplace else. And that is very easy to do, and you can convince yourself of all sorts of righteousness behind that cause as life goes on. But you got to be careful with that stuff. So should we do this? Okay, where's the passage about the?
Actually, I already have it pulled up.
Okay, where is it at?
It is Matthew 22 was the one I was thinking.
Matthew 22.
Yep, and it is verses 17 through 21.
There you go. A little closer to you.
Tell us, therefore, what thinkest thou? So the context here is the Herodians are coming and harassing Jesus as he comes into the city. And it's, tell us, therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their wickedness, and said, Why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. And they brought unto him a penny. And he saith unto them, Whose is this image and superscription? They say unto him, Caesar's. Then saith he unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's.
Okay, so here's my take on that. All right? What makes that Caesar's?
It's his image and superscription
Right.
on it.
Who put that picture on there?
Caesar.
Okay, so but where'd the money come from?
That's a trick question.
The government doesn't have any money, right?
I mean,
That
if
mu-
they made that, they
that
clearly do.
Well, they didn't go out and mine the gold out of the ground or nothing.
I mean, sure.
So they stamped their picture on it to
Yeah.
make you think it's theirs, to make you think they're the source of your wealth.
And he says, render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar.
Right, so
That's
the thing-
him agreeing that it belongs to Caesar.
It doesn't belong to the guy that went out and worked for it?
If it did, he would have said so.
Okay, so does all of your money belong to Caesar?
Yeah, if all your money has the image and superscription of Caesar on it, by that passage there, it all belongs to Caesar. Every penny you own belongs to Abraham Lincoln.
Every dollar on. Okay, well,
Yeah,
we,
it's
we,
George Washington's
we
money.
disagree. I think Jesus is saying, look, they claim this for themselves. Let them have it, and they claim it for themselves by putting their picture on it. So now that we've addressed that, so in this matter of how to live your life and how to not get caught up in side issues and nonsense, I want to show you two examples of how the Apostle Paul handled himself, and I find they're both pretty kind of interesting here. So in Acts 16, gotta stop putting that there. Acts 16. There was a Republican debate one time. I don't know. I think it was 2012 or 2008, somewhere up in there. And they actually took. This is when everything wasn't scripted. Like a lot of things were, but this one wasn't. I don't think, because there's no way this guy would have got through, whatever. And so they're taking questions from the audience. Ron Paul was in it, so it was either 2008 or 2012. And this guy stood up in the audience, and he takes a dollar bill out of his wallet, and he holds it up, and he says, "What percentage of this do you think is yours?" And they're like, they didn't understand the question. They just like hemmed and hawed and talked about tax reform. And then Ron Paul said, "I got a sign on my desk that says, 'Don't steal. The government hates competition.'" Anyway, Acts 16.
Acts 16.
Yeah. So the context of Acts 16 is Paul and Silas are going to jail, and then they get out of jail because the jailer there gets saved in verse 31. Verse 35, verse 35. And when it was day, the magistrate sent the sergeants, saying, "Let these men go." And the keeper of the prison told the saying to Paul, "The magistrates have sent to let you go. Now therefore depart and go in peace." But Paul said to them, "They have beaten us openly, uncondemned, being Romans, and have cast us into prison. And now do they thus thrust us out privily? Nay, verily, but let them come themselves and fetch us out." And the sergeants told these words to the magistrates, and they feared when they heard they were Romans, and they came, besought them, and brought them out, and desired them to depart out of the city. So think about that, what Paul just did. And then look at Acts 22, just a couple pages over.
22.
Or a couple of thumb scrolly things over. I don't know what to call things.
Clicks.
Sure, let's go with that. Acts 22. I got this paper from pointing the wrong way. Verse 22.
Acts 22, verse 22.
And they gave him audience unto this word, and they lifted up their voices and said, "Away from with such a fellow from the earth, for it is not fit that he should live." Just as a side, I heard a guy say one time that no one had ever said during his preaching they wanted him dead. And I was like, yeah, it happens to me like once a week. As they cried out, cast off their clothes, and threw dust into the air, the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle and bade that he should be examined by scourging. I think that's funny. Like, we're going to beat this guy until we get the truth out of him, that he might know wherefore they cried so against him. And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, "Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned?" And when the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, "Take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman." Then the chief captain came and said unto him, "Tell me, art thou a Roman?" He said, "Yea." The chief captain answered, "With a great sum obtained I this freedom." And Paul said, "But I was free born." Then straightway they departed from him, which should have been examined him. And the chief captain also was afraid, after he knew that he was a Roman, and because he had bound him. And on the morrow, because he would have known the certainty wherefore he was accused of the Jews, he loosed him from his bands, and commanded the chief priests and all the council to appear, and brought Paul down and set him before them. So my point in showing you those two passages is that there's a couple of times in Paul's ministry where Paul pulled out the "I'm a Roman citizen, you can't touch me" card. And there's plenty of times where he didn't. Now, when they're stoning to death outside of Lystra or whatever, that's not the Roman government doing that. That's the populace, right? So playing the Roman card would do any good. But here, what he's doing is he's making the government play by the rules that they agreed to. They agreed you don't beat Romans uncondemned. They agree that you can't arrest a Roman and then put him out the back door so nobody knows you did it. He's making them play by the rules that they said they would. So the principle here is that it is perfectly okay to play any card you've got and any time you see fit to play it. And the reason I mention this is because as an American, you do have some cards to play. You've got a constitution and you've got the ability to vote. And I'm not a big humongous fan of voting, a big advocate of it. But I mean, if that is something you have that other people don't have, and if you want to help put in people that are more sympathetic, that'll give you some room, then by it. But the struggle here is, and this is something I know a little bit about. The struggle here is knowing when to fight and what to fight over and what weapon to use. And I'll give you an example. I got a couple examples. There is a well-known creation guy. I wasn't going to use. I'll say his name. Kent Hovind. And I met Kent. You were just a wee thing. We met him at one of these homeschool conventions, and great guy. I got along with him right away. I felt like I'd known him my whole life. And but he's telling me back then. Do you remember us going to Dinosaur Adventureland? Do you remember that at all? Was that too far back?
Vaguely.
Yeah. So what Kent Hovind had done is he'd taken his property there on Halifax Street there in Pensacola, and he turned it into like a dinosaur adventure theme park that taught science and whatnot. And he'd gone through all this stuff with the permit people in Pensacola, because he didn't pull permits for nothing. He just built buildings. And the inspector came by and said, you didn't pull a permit for this. He said, "What's the concern?" Well, the concern is it's not safe. So Kent Hovind, rather than pay the permit, he went and paid a guy, a structural engineer, to come in and verify that this building could stand up to a Category 5 hurricane. Yeah. And so the inspector's like, "That's not the point." And Kent goes, "Oh, so the point is I didn't give you the money. I gave it to this engineer. That's the point." And the guy goes, "Yeah, that's the point. You gave the money to the engineer and not to us." Right? Yeah. So we went there one time. All those buildings were open, and went there very next time, and they were brand new. and they were condemned. Could not let people inside them. Anyway, so I met Kent like it's years ago, and Kent he decided he told me. I'm sitting there just talking to him, right? And he's telling me, he says, I don't pay taxes. He said, I don't pay income tax. I don't pay Social Security tax. I don't charge people sales tax because taxation is theft. And I agree with him that taxation is theft. But I told him at the time, they're going to put you in jail. No, they can't. I'm right. You're right. But they put that joker in jail. Yeah. And then it went on from there. He did all kind of strange, bizarre things to kind of duck and dodge. He declared his backyard a sovereign country, not chargeable to U.S. He got on the phone with his son, and these phone calls are on the internet because they record the phone calls from prison. As it turns out, who knew? He told his son, "Here's how we're going to hide all this money from the government. Here's how we're going to keep them taking our stuff." And I agree that he's right, but the fact is they did these things to him, and he lost like 10 years of ministry because he's sitting in a jail cell because he wouldn't get off his wallet and pony up a little bit of shakedown money. Fine, protection money, whatever you want to call it. That's the decision he made. In my opinion, that was a bad call. Mm-hmm. And now, whenever he gets up and talks about creation, people can go on the YouTube and find where he's conspiring with his son against the government. Yep. It's a bad deal. So you got to decide what to fight. You got to fight and what weapon to use. So the other story I was going to tell is, as good as anybody listening, better than anybody listening. We've been going up to Brunswick for 10 years, I guess, maybe, doing First Fridays, right? And so the city government up there does not want us there, and they've done lots of things to stop us from the police were harassing us, and then the police decided that this wasn't working. There's been about 3 people in charge of that festival up there, and I've talked to 2 of them. I don't know who's in charge of it right now, but the second person, the lady, she told me and Darnell, she goes, "I'm not going to be happy until you're sitting in a jail cell." Now I don't know why. Like, I don't know what I've done to her. But they set up big bandstands and speakers, and they hired the Shriners to come in and play Highway to Hell on a loop, all that was going on. Yeah. And I called some people, and I called Brunswick Mayor, and I called the City Council, and that was going nowhere. So Darnell and I just started praying that God would remove our enemies. And we've got almost an open door in Brunswick now, and we have had for months. So if there is genuine government injustice, you can either take it, and you could pray to God about it, or you could do both. You can take it until God moves it. Now I'm gonna talk real quick about some qualifiers in the other direction. 1 Peter 2. I think we were there a while ago.
Yes, we were.
I don't know why I didn't cover it then. I don't know. That's 2 Peter. 1 Peter 2, verse 13. So there are certain Christians that are prone to be rule followers, and they will read a passage one way. And there's people like me, for right or wrong, are less inclined to follow the rules, and we'll read it differently. So we're going to try to read this the way it's written. Submit yourself, verse 13, submit yourself to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, that's Romans 13, and the praise of them that do well, that's Romans 13. For so it is the will of God that well-doing you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. So you're not submitting to the ordinance of man because they're right or because they're smart. You're submitting the ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, so the gospel doesn't go out.
For so is the will of God.
Right. So the example I like to use is and this did happen to people. If you were behind the Iron Curtain in the 80s and 90s and 70s, and you were smuggling Bibles into communist countries, and the KGB or somebody decided just to stop and give you a hard time, you could throw a fit, and you would draw even more attention to yourself, and you could, with that additional scrutiny, they could find the Bibles you're smuggling, or you could let them frisk you and get on down the road to do the thing God called you to do. And man, that's a tough call.
Yeah.
That's a tough call, and people have to make that call in real time. You have to go along. That's probably the wrong word, but you have to go along with nonsense and injustice sometimes that is directed towards you in order to accomplish a larger thing. And I wonder sometimes, like I go out and preach, and you've gone with me and all that stuff. But I know that if we get threatened with arrest, a couple times a year maybe, not as much as we used to, not because we're winning them over, but just because we've outlasted all the people that was going to put us in jail. But I know that if I get arrested, I know that I can call your mom. They're going to let me call your mom, right? And then she's going to come bail me out. And then we're going to have a day in court, and all these protections are in place. So if I go in that jail cell, I know I'm coming out probably the same day, or at least the next day. They're not going to put me in a dungeon and not let me call my wife. And y'all are going to spend the rest of your lives knowing what happened to me, not knowing what happened to me. But if I was in Saudi Arabia and I say, I'm going to go out and preach, honey, and I tell your mom, I'm going to go out and go preach, and she knows and I know that if the wrong person comes by, you'll never see me again. That's a whole different level of stuff. And I don't know. I mean, I like to think I'm a brave guy. I like to think I'm a tough guy. But I don't know what I would do. Because I have an obligation to the gospel. I also have an obligation to your mom, right?
Yeah.
And so Christians down through the centuries have had to make that assessment for themselves and figure this out for themselves in real time on the ground. What are you smiling about? Oh, okay. So God tells you to go preach. And if man tells you not to go preach, then you just obey God rather than man. But God never told you not to pay your taxes.
Yeah.
So look, let's
He explicitly does tell you to pay your taxes,
and
whether or not you believe that's right. But
yeah, Matthew 17. We'll finish up here.
Matthew 17.
Yeah, which we read it before. Notwithstanding, lest we should offend them. So Jesus' point in paying his taxes is not because he loves the Roman government. It's because he doesn't want to offend them. Okay. Go out of the sea and cast a hook and take up the fish that first cometh up, and when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. That take and give unto them for me and thee. So the takeaway is that God provides the ways and means to obey stupid rules and petty bureaucrats. And so you're living in a broken world ruled by the devil and pinhead people, and sometimes it gets so aggravating and so burdensome. And what you got to do is you got to stay on target, you got to stay on mission, you got to stay focused on the things God has actually told you to do, and not get waylaid by a bunch of nonsense. As we close, do you have any thoughts, Cameron?
No, I've pretty much said them throughout the as we go.
Okay, well, this has been the Street Preachers Podcast. Thank you for listening, all four of you. I may have to change that to 5 soon. I always say all 4 of you, but as the channel grows, I may have to upgrade that to 5. You know who you are, though, and out of all things you could be doing, you chose to listen to us, and I appreciate it. So thank you for listening, all 4 of you, or 5 of you, and do something for Jesus Christ, and I will see you on the other side.
Oh, it is wonderful to be a Christian. I can't hear you, but it's wonderful to be God's child. Oh, it is wonderful to have your sins forgiven. Oh, it is wonderful to be redeemed, justified forever, reconciled.